Texarkana, 1940s. A town straddling the border of Texas and Arkansas, where the summer heat clung to the air like a second skin, and the Red River whispered tales of the past to those who would listen. It was a place caught between the rustic charm of the South and the burgeoning progress of the post-war era. The streets, lined with modest homes and the occasional mom-and-pop store, resonated with a sense of community and simplicity. Life here moved at a leisurely pace. The townsfolk, a mix of farmers, factory workers, and small business owners, knew each other by name and often gathered in the local diner to exchange stories over a cup of coffee and freshly baked pie. The children played in the streets until the streetlights flickered on, their laughter echoing through the neighborhoods as a testament to the town's serene nature. Sheriff John Hartley was a fixture in this community. A veteran lawman, Hartley had seen his share of petty crimes and local disputes, but nothing that couldn't be solved with a stern talk and a handshake. He took pride in keeping his town safe, believing that the worst of humanity lay far beyond Texarkana's borders. But as the summer of 1945 approached, a sense of unease began to settle over the town. It started as a whisper, a rumor of something unsettling, a shadow cast over the sunlit streets. The townspeople spoke of it in hushed tones, a growing undercurrent of worry that something was amiss. It wasn't until the first body was found that the whispers turned to cries of horror. The victim, a young woman from the north side of town, was discovered in a way that shook the community to its core. The brutality of it was unlike anything Texarkana had ever seen. It was a crime that didn't belong in their small peaceful town, a stark reminder that evil could lurk in the most unexpected places. As fear took hold, the once vibrant streets grew quiet. Doors were locked tight, and curtains were drawn as families huddled together, wondering who or what could have shattered their idyllic life. The shadow that had been looming at the edge of their consciousness had descended upon them, and with it, a terror that seemed to have no end. Sheriff Hartley stood at the forefront of this unfolding nightmare, a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. Yet, even he could not shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The town of Texarkana, once a haven of peace and community, braced itself against the unknown, its residents praying for a return to the days before the terror came to their doorstep. And so, the story of the Texarkana Terror begins. The morning sun had barely risen over Texarkana when Sheriff John Hartley received the call that would change everything. A local fisherman, casting his line in the quiet hours of dawn near the banks of the Red River, had stumbled upon a horrific scene. The body of a young woman lay among the reeds, her life extinguished in a manner most brutal and mysterious. Sheriff Hartley, a tall man with weathered features and a steady gaze, arrived at the scene with a sense of urgency masked by his calm demeanor. He had been the law in Texarkana for more than 2 decades, but nothing in his years of service had prepared him for this. The victim was Mary Simmons, a 23-year-old waitress known for her kind smile and dreams of leaving Texarkana for the bright lights of Dallas. The crime scene was a grim tableau. Mary's body showed signs of a struggle, her clothes were torn, and there were marks on her wrists and ankles. The cause of death was not immediately apparent, and there were no obvious weapons. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the aftermath of his violence. The news spread through Texarkana like wildfire. Fear gripped the heart of every resident. Parents clutched their children a little tighter, and neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. The idea that one of their own could commit such an atrocity was unthinkable. Sheriff Hartley knew he had to act fast. He called for a meeting with his deputies, outlining a plan to canvass the area for witnesses and gather any evidence. He also requested assistance from the state police, knowing that the scope of this investigation might stretch beyond his resources. Meanwhile, rumors and theories began to circulate among the townspeople. Some whispered about a transient passing through, others suspected a jilted lover, but no theory seemed to fit the senseless nature of the crime. The sheriff, a man of logic and reason, refused to give in to baseless speculation. Yet, even he could not shake off a creeping sense of dread. The randomness of the attack suggested that anyone could be the next target. As night fell on Texarkana, a palpable tension hung in the air. The streets, usually alive with the sounds of evening activity, were eerily silent. Families sat in their homes, listening to the radio for any news, jumping at every creak and groan of their old houses. Sheriff Hartley, sitting in his office, pored over the scant evidence they had collected. He knew that the key to solving this mystery lay in understanding the mind behind such a heinous act. But with each passing hour, the trail seemed to grow colder, and the shadow of fear loomed larger over the town of Texarkana. As the sheriff gazed out his window into the darkening sky, he made a silent vow to bring the perpetrator to justice. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt Texarkana for years to come. In the days following the discovery of Mary Simmons' body, a heavy cloud of fear and uncertainty descended upon Texarkana. The town, once a tapestry of communal warmth and friendly faces, now looked like a scene from a forgotten ghost town, with people scarcely venturing outside. Sheriff Hartley, with his characteristic determination, dove headfirst into the investigation. He organized search parties combing the riverbanks and nearby woods, hoping to find any clue that the killer might have left behind. Meanwhile, the state police brought in a few of their best detectives to aid in the investigation, turning the small sheriff's office into a bustling hub of activity. Despite their efforts, leads were frustratingly scarce. Interviews with Mary's friends and acquaintances painted a picture of a young woman beloved by many, with no known enemies. The lack of motive only added to the mystery, leaving the lawmen grasping at straws. As Hartley and his team worked tirelessly, the town's anxiety grew. Rumors swirled, each more outrageous than the last. People whispered of a murderous drifter, a jilted lover, or even a crazed local hiding in plain sight. The sheriff, however, refused to give in to hearsay, focusing instead on the facts, no matter how meager. Then, just as the town started to hope that the worst was over, tragedy struck again. Another body was found, this time a middle-aged man named Tom Jennings, discovered in his own home on the outskirts of town. The scene bore a chilling resemblance to Mary's murder. No sign of forced entry, no clear motive, and a brutality that shook even the most seasoned officers. The second murder sent shockwaves through Texarkana. The idea of a serial killer, a concept so foreign and terrifying, became the only logical conclusion. Parents kept their children indoors, and the once bustling downtown area became deserted after sunset. The town's social fabric began to unravel, with trust giving way to suspicion and fear. Sheriff Hartley felt the pressure mounting. He knew that the key to solving these murders lay in finding the connection between the victims, but the link remained elusive. Each clue seemed to lead to a dead end, and the lack of progress weighed heavily on him. In the midst of this chaos, a new figure emerged. A local journalist named Alice Walker. Ambitious and relentless, Alice saw the murders as her chance to make a name for herself. She started her own investigation, often clashing with the sheriff's more traditional methods. Her articles in the local paper, filled with speculations and theories, only added to the town's growing hysteria. The once peaceful Texarkana was now a town gripped by fear, its residents looking over their shoulders, wondering who among them could be capable of such heinous acts. And as the sun set on another day of fruitless investigation, Sheriff Hartley couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The terror in Texarkana was far from over, and the true horror of what was unfolding had yet to reveal itself. The mood in Texarkana was one of palpable dread. The once bustling streets were now desolate, the silence broken only by the occasional patrol car. The double murders had transformed the town from a peaceful community into a place haunted by unseen horrors. Sheriff Hartley, feeling the weight of the town's safety on his shoulders, intensified his efforts. With 2 murders and no suspects, Hartley knew they were dealing with someone extremely dangerous and cunning. They pored over crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and witness statements, looking for any pattern or anomaly. Robertson suggested that the killer was likely someone familiar with the area, possibly even a local, which sent a fresh wave of unease through the sheriff's office. The investigation took a turn when Alice Walker, the journalist, published an article drawing parallels between the Texarkana murders and similar cases in other states. Her bold claims, lacking concrete evidence, were met with skepticism by the law enforcement, but they ignited the public's imagination. The story of the Texarkana Terror, as she dubbed the unknown assailant, began to spread beyond the town's borders. As the investigation continued, a curfew was imposed in Texarkana. Nighttime patrols were doubled, and residents were advised to keep their doors locked at all times. Despite these precautions, the atmosphere in the town was one of impending doom. The killer, like a ghost, seemed to move among them undetected. The sheriff's office received numerous calls daily, with townspeople reporting suspicious activities and possible sightings of the murderer. Each lead was followed, but most turned out to be dead ends, further frustrating the already exhausted team. In a bid to draw out the killer, Hartley and Robertson set up a series of decoys and sting operations. They also began conducting secret surveillance on several persons of interest, though this decision raised ethical concerns and the ire of the local community. Meanwhile, the town's residents grappled with their fear and paranoia. People began to suspect their neighbors, and old grudges resurfaced, leading to several confrontations and false accusations. The fabric of the community was unraveling, and trust, once the cornerstone of life in Texarkana, was now a rare commodity. As weeks turned into months without any significant leads or arrests, the town's fear evolved into a quiet resignation. The Texarkana Terror, as the killer was now widely known, had instilled a deep-seated terror that lingered in the air like a bad omen. Sheriff Hartley, feeling the strain of the unsolved cases, began to question his capabilities. The lack of progress was maddening, and the burden of the town's safety weighed heavily on him. He knew that the key to ending this nightmare was out there, hidden in the shadows of Texarkana, waiting to be uncovered. But as another night descended upon the town, bringing with it an oppressive darkness, the sheriff couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The hunt for the Texarkana Terror was far from over, and the true extent of the terror gripping the town was only just beginning to unfold. The investigation into the Texarkana murders had reached a stalemate. Weeks had turned into months, and the elusive killer remained at large, casting a long shadow over the once peaceful town. Sheriff Hartley, grappling with the pressure and the mounting frustration, continued to work tirelessly, but with each passing day, the hope of catching the perpetrator seemed to dim. The lack of progress in the case began to take its toll on the townspeople. Fear and suspicion had bred a toxic atmosphere. Neighbors who had once greeted each other with warm smiles now looked away, distrust evident in their eyes. The sense of community, once Texarkana's pride, was disintegrating under the strain of the unsolved crimes. In this climate of fear and paranoia, several false leads and baseless accusations emerged. One such lead took the investigation down a rabbit hole when a local man, known for his eccentric behavior, was reported to be acting suspiciously. The sheriff's office, desperate for any solid lead, investigated thoroughly, only to find that the suspicions were unfounded, fueled more by paranoia than by evidence. This pattern repeated itself several times, straining the resources and morale of Hartley's team. The public's confidence in the law enforcement began to waver, and whispers of incompetence and failure started to circulate. The pressure was mounting on Sheriff Hartley, who felt the weight of every accusing gaze. Amidst this turmoil, Alice Walker, the journalist who had been following the case closely, continued to publish articles that were a mix of investigative journalism and sensationalism. Her stories, though often criticized by the authorities, kept the public engaged and the case in the spotlight. Her latest piece suggested a possible connection between the Texarkana murders and a series of unsolved crimes in neighboring states, a theory that, while intriguing, lacked concrete evidence. Meanwhile, Agent Robertson, the FBI profiler, started to develop a profile of the killer. He surmised that the perpetrator was likely someone living a double life, appearing normal to those around him, while harboring a deep-seated rage and a compulsion to kill. This profile, however, did little to narrow down the list of suspects in a town where everyone was already on edge. As the investigation continued to hit dead ends, a third murder shook the town. An elderly couple was found dead in their home, the scene mirroring the brutality of the previous murders. This latest atrocity sent a clear message: the killer was still among them, his appetite for violence unabated. The third murder reignited the urgency of the investigation, but it also deepened the despair. The townspeople's fleeting hopes that the nightmare was over were crushed, and a sense of helpless terror settled over Texarkana once again. Sheriff Hartley, feeling the burden of his responsibility more than ever, knew they were running out of time. The killer needed to be stopped before more lives were lost. But as he stared at the files spread out before him, the elusive nature of the killer taunting him from the pages, he couldn't help but feel like they were chasing a ghost. The shadows of doubt were closing in, and the terror in Texarkana was far from over. The hunt for the killer had become a race against time, a race that they were perilously close to losing. In the wake of the third brutal murder, the town of Texarkana was engulfed in a state of near panic. The killings, random and cruel, had shattered any remaining illusions of safety. The residents, once proud of their close-knit community, now viewed their neighbors with suspicion and fear. Sheriff Hartley, feeling the pressure from both the townspeople and his own conscience, doubled down on his efforts. He extended the investigation beyond the borders of Texarkana, coordinating with neighboring towns and counties. Roadblocks were set up, and patrols were increased, casting a wide net in the hope of catching the elusive killer. The media frenzy surrounding the murders intensified, with reporters from all over the state descending upon the small town. Alice Walker's articles continued to stir the public's imagination, her theories and speculations becoming more daring with each publication. The town, once a mere dot on the map, had become synonymous with a chilling mystery. Amidst this chaos, the investigation faced internal struggles. The sheriff's team, strained by long hours and the constant pressure, began to show signs of fatigue and frustration. Disagreements over how to proceed were common, and Hartley found himself mediating more than leading at times. The breakthrough they desperately needed came in an unexpected form. A local man, out for a late-night walk, reported seeing a suspicious figure lurking near the scene of the latest murder. Though the description was vague, it was the first eyewitness account that placed someone at the scene of a crime. Energized by this new lead, Hartley and his team launched a door-to-door search in the area where the sighting was reported. They interviewed residents, combed through backyards, and scoured local businesses for any surveillance footage. The town, already on edge, cooperated fully, their desire for resolution outweighing their need for privacy. Meanwhile, Agent Robertson delved deeper into the psychological profile of the killer. He theorized that the murderer was likely experiencing a sense of empowerment and control from the chaos he was causing. This insight led to a shift in their approach, focusing on individuals who might have exhibited behavioral changes around the time of the murders. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to take its toll on Hartley. The once confident and assertive sheriff was now a man haunted by the shadows of the unsolved crimes. The lack of sleep and the constant stress were evident in his haggard appearance and short temper. The town, too, was changing. The once lively community events were now sparsely attended, and the streets were deserted well before the curfew hours. Trust, the foundation of any small community, had eroded, leaving in its place a pervasive sense of dread. In a desperate move, Hartley organized a town hall meeting, hoping to reassure the public and gather any information that people might be withholding. The meeting, however, quickly descended into chaos, with residents voicing their anger and fear, accusing the sheriff's office of incompetence. The meeting ended with no new leads, only a heightened sense of despair. As Hartley left the town hall, the weight of his failure pressing down on him, he knew that they were running out of options. The killer was still out there, and with each passing day, the likelihood of another murder grew. The Texarkana Terror, as the killer was now infamously known, had plunged the town into darkness. And as night fell on another day of fruitless investigation, the fear that gripped the hearts of Texarkana's residents grew deeper, the terror far from over. The investigation into the Texarkana murders had become a quagmire, with no clear path forward. The town, once a beacon of southern hospitality, now lay in the grip of an unseen predator, its streets shrouded in suspicion and fear. Sheriff Hartley, his face lined with the stress of sleepless nights, continued to push his team to their limits. They revisited the crime scenes, re-interviewed witnesses, and double-checked alibis, hoping to uncover something they might have missed. But the killer remained a ghost, leaving no trace, no clue that could lead to his capture. The residents of Texarkana, once so trusting of their neighbors, now locked their doors and watched from behind curtains. The community gatherings, barbecues, and church picnics that had been the town's lifeblood were now things of the past. In their place was a palpable sense of dread, a fear that the next victim could be any one of them. Amidst this atmosphere of paranoia, a new development sent a ripple of hope through the sheriff's office. A local mechanic, working late into the night, reported seeing a suspicious vehicle near one of the crime scenes. The description of the car was unique enough to stand out in the small town, and Hartley seized upon this lead with renewed vigor. The sheriff's team conducted a painstaking search for the vehicle, checking every garage, parking lot, and backyard in Texarkana. The public was asked to report any sighting of the car, and for the first time in weeks, the community's fear was channeled into proactive action. In the midst of this renewed effort, Hartley received unexpected assistance. A group of local volunteers, led by a determined Alice Walker, formed a neighborhood watch program. They patrolled the streets at night, keeping an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. Hartley was initially skeptical of the group, but soon realized that their presence helped to ease the town's anxiety. As the investigation into the vehicle lead intensified, a sense of cautious optimism began to emerge. Perhaps this was the break they had been waiting for, the key to unlocking the mystery that had held Texarkana in its terrifying grip. But as the days passed with no sign of the vehicle, the initial surge of hope began to wane. The town's brief period of unity and purpose gave way once again to fear and suspicion. The predator remained unseen, his shadowy presence a constant reminder of the danger that lurked among them. Sheriff Hartley, feeling the weight of his unfulfilled promise to protect his town, grew more determined. He knew that the key to catching the killer lay in understanding him, in unraveling the twisted logic that drove him to commit such heinous acts. But with each passing day, the reality of their situation became clearer. They were not just hunting a murderer, they were hunting a phantom, a ghostly predator who moved through Texarkana unseen, leaving only death and terror in his wake. The terror in Texarkana was far from over, and the hunt for the killer, now more desperate than ever, continued into the dark, uncertain future. As the autumn leaves began to fall, painting the streets of Texarkana in shades of red and gold, the town remained under the shadow of the unseen predator. The initial rush of fear had settled into a deep, lingering dread. The murders, still unsolved, had become an open wound on the community's psyche. Sheriff Hartley, more determined than ever, pushed his team to the brink. The recent lead about the suspicious vehicle had gone cold, leaving them back at square one. The strain of the investigation was evident in the weary faces of his deputies, the once bustling sheriff's office now a somber place. In a surprising twist, a new piece of evidence emerged that reignited the investigation. A local pawn shop owner came forward, reporting a peculiar transaction that took place around the time of the first murder. A man, whose description vaguely matched the eyewitness account of the suspicious figure, had pawned an item that could potentially be linked to the crimes. Seizing upon this new lead, Hartley and his team scrambled to trace the origins of the pawned item. They scoured through sales records, interviewed residents, and followed every possible lead. The town, sensing a shift in the investigation, watched with bated breath, hoping for a resolution to the nightmare. Amidst this frantic activity, Agent Robertson received a tip about a possible suspect, a local man with a troubled past and a known history of violence. With cautious optimism, the sheriff's team shifted their focus, conducting a covert surveillance operation on the man. The surveillance yielded promising results. The suspect exhibited several behaviors that matched Robertson's profile of the killer. The tension within the sheriff's office was palpable as they prepared to make their move. In a dramatic turn of events, the suspect was brought in for questioning. The interrogation was tense, with Hartley and Robertson taking turns probing for a confession or a slip-up. But to their dismay, the suspect's alibi was airtight, and they were forced to release him due to a lack of concrete evidence. The failed interrogation was a significant blow to the investigation. The morale of Hartley's team plummeted, and the townspeople's hope for a quick resolution faded. The feeling of being back to square one was overwhelming. The pressure on Sheriff Hartley reached its zenith. He found himself questioning his own judgment, wondering if his desire to protect his town had clouded his decision-making. The burden of the unsolved murders weighed heavily on him, the faces of the victims haunting his every moment. In a town hall meeting, Hartley faced the community's frustration and anger head-on. He reassured them that the investigation was still his top priority and pleaded for their continued support and patience. The meeting, though tense, served to rekindle a sense of community in the face of shared adversity. As Texarkana settled into an uneasy routine, the shadow of the killer loomed large. The terror that had gripped the town showed no signs of abating, and the fear that another murder could happen at any moment was ever present. Sheriff Hartley, standing at the edge of his breaking point, knew that the killer was still out there, watching and waiting. The hunt for the Texarkana Terror was far from over, and the path to catching him was as elusive and treacherous as ever. The winter chill had settled over Texarkana, and with it came a grim resolve. The town, once paralyzed by fear, now simmered with a quiet determination. The murders had not only scarred the community, but it also galvanized it. People were more vigilant, more cooperative with law enforcement, and more supportive of each other. But the shadow of the killer still loomed over them, a constant reminder of the threat among them. Sheriff Hartley, driven by a mix of duty and personal obsession, continued to lead the investigation with unwavering focus. The false leads and dead ends had not deterred him, instead, they had sharpened his resolve. He knew that the key to catching the killer lay in understanding the patterns, no matter how faint or elusive they seemed. Working closely with Agent Robertson, Hartley began to piece together a more refined profile of the killer. They re-examined every piece of evidence, revisited every crime scene, and re-interviewed witnesses, looking for the elusive thread that connected the murders. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, from a detail in one of the crime scene reports that had previously been overlooked. A unique type of tire tread was found at two of the crime scenes. This detail, seemingly insignificant at first, became the linchpin of their investigation. The team scoured through vehicle records and sales data, cross-referencing them with their list of suspects and persons of interest. Their efforts paid off when they identified a local man whose vehicle matched the tire tread and who had been acting suspiciously, according to several eyewitnesses. The suspect, a seemingly average resident with no apparent motive for such heinous crimes, fit the psychological profile Robertson had developed. With this new lead, Hartley and his team prepared for a confrontation. They conducted surveillance on the suspect, gathering enough evidence to obtain a warrant. The tension was palpable as the team set out to apprehend the suspect, knowing that any mistake could result in the killer slipping through their fingers. The arrest was made in the early hours of the morning. The suspect, caught off guard, offered little resistance. As he was taken into custody, a wave of relief mixed with disbelief swept over the team. Could this unassuming individual be the elusive predator who had terrorized Texarkana for months? The interrogation was intense. Hartley, determined to get to the truth, pressed the suspect for answers. Slowly, through a combination of evidence and psychological tactics, the suspect began to unravel. He confessed to the murders, describing them with a chilling detachment and a lack of remorse that shook even the most seasoned officers. The motive was as mundane as it was disturbing, a mixture of deep-seated anger, a desire for control, and a perverse pleasure in instilling fear. The town of Texarkana had been the unfortunate stage for his twisted game. As news of the arrest spread, a collective sigh of relief swept through Texarkana. The nightmare was finally over, but the scars it left would not fade quickly. The community had been forever changed by the terror that had walked among them. Sheriff Hartley, while relieved at the resolution of the case, couldn't shake off a sense of unease. The ease with which evil had hidden in plain sight in their small town was a sobering reminder of the fragility of peace and safety. The story of the Texarkana Terror would be told and retold in the years to come, a cautionary tale of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of any community. But for Sheriff Hartley and the residents of Texarkana, it was more than a story, it was a lived experience, a testament to their resilience in the face of unspeakable horror. And so, as the sun rose over a quieter, more vigilant Texarkana, life began to move forward. But the memories of that year, the year of the Texarkana Terror, would linger in the minds of its residents, a haunting reminder of the terror that never truly ends. Months had passed since the arrest of the Texarkana Terror. The streets of Texarkana, once scenes of unspeakable horror, had slowly returned to their former tranquility. The shops were open, children played in the parks, and neighbors greeted each other with smiles that were no longer tinged with suspicion. Yet, beneath this veneer of normalcy, the scars of the past lingered. Sheriff Hartley, hailed as a hero for his role in solving the case, found little solace in his newfound status. The ordeal had changed him, leaving a mark on his soul that no commendation could erase. He spent his days and nights haunted by the what-ifs and the faces of the victims, wondering if anything could have been done differently to save them. The town held a memorial service for the victims, a somber affair attended by most of Texarkana. Speeches were made, prayers were offered, and tears were shed. It was a necessary step in the town's healing process, but it also served as a stark reminder of the darkness that had descended upon them. Alice Walker, the journalist who had covered the murders extensively, released a book on the case. It was an instant bestseller, offering a detailed account of the events that had shaken the town. While some praised her for bringing the story to a wider audience, others in Texarkana felt that it reopened wounds that were just beginning to heal. As life in Texarkana resumed its rhythm, there were those who found it hard to move on. Families of the victims struggled with their loss, and even those who had not been directly affected felt a lingering sense of unease. The town had lost its innocence, and the realization that such evil could exist in their midst was a heavy burden to bear. Sheriff Hartley, in a moment of quiet reflection, realized that the terror might never truly end. The physical presence of the killer had been removed, but the psychological impact, the shadow he had cast over Texarkana, would linger for years, perhaps generations. In a twist of fate that seemed cruelly ironic, reports of copycat crimes began to surface in other towns, inspired by the notoriety of the Texarkana Terror. It was a grim reminder that evil did not reside in one person or place, but lurked in the shadows of society, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Texarkana, once a symbol of small-town America, had become a symbol of something much darker.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the video. We highly recommend you watch the next video here. Oops. I'm waiting for you to click. Yes, you've clicked. Happy watching.